Feedback systems were a problem or a question with some people, so let's just talk briefly about what they are. And basically, what a feedback system refers to is any sort of system, and these notions come from engineering largely, but we're going to see that they have a role in behavior. But any system in which part or all of the output alters the input, thereby influencing the action of the system. The output feeds back on the input and the notion of the input. So there are many examples of feedback systems in engineering and around the world, believe it or not. In your house, your thermostat, that little thing on the wall that governs how the temperature of the room, is a feedback system, is part of a feedback system. A thermostat turns on it has a little temperature gauge in there, and it turns on the heater or turns on the air conditioner when you hit particular points. And as the room heats up, it feeds back onto the thermostat, meaning it changes the temperature gauge in the thermostat, and then when the temperature reaches when enough heat has been added to the system, the output of the system is heat. The heat acts on the thermostat or in a little temperature gauge in there, and when it reaches a point, it turns off the heater. Your air conditioner is also a feedback system. So those are called negative feedback systems because the output reduces the subsequent output, if you will. There are positive feedback systems in which the output increases, acts on the input so that it turns more of it on. So if you can think about rolling down a hill, that's a positive feedback system. So in behavioral terms, there are a lot of feedback systems that are operative in psychological processes. One of the most well-studied ones is feeding. So what we have is we know that eating is related to the activity in your stomach, the feelings that you have, the sensory feedback from your stomach, whether it's empty, whether it's full. We know that insulin level and ghrelin level and leptin level and neuropeptide Y level, these are hormones and neurotransmitters that act on certain things. Glucose level, your blood glucose level is all part of a feedback system that's involved in eating. So when you feel your stomach rumbling and levels of certain hormones are high or low or glucose is high, this sort of induces you to eat, and by eating you fill the stomach, and that changes these glucose levels and other hormone levels, and that reduces the rumbling and the grumbling and so on, therefore reducing the amount of food that you intake for a short period of time, which reduces the distension in your gut and how you feel. So feeding is a feedback system. The food into the system alters how much food you take in. What's interesting is that a lot of eating disorders and a lot of feeding disorders are problems with this issue, and some of these, there are delays to them. So for example, when you eat and when you have as you're eating, there's not immediate feedback there's not immediate changes to leptin, ghrelin, and insulin levels and NPY levels. They take a little bit of time to get going. So if you've ever eaten a meal and stopped for a few minutes and then didn't feel at all hungry anymore, you can understand that maybe those what we call satiety signals are a little bit delayed in terms of when we eat. So your book sort of talks about the reflexes is a feedback system, and it is true the physiology of many reflexes has been worked out, and that's why physicians, your doctor, test their patellar reflex. Now your patellar reflex is the patellar tendon. It's on your knee. It's just below your knee, and they get out that little rubber hammer, right? And your leg dangles over the table, and they knock it with that rubber hammer, and you give a little kick, and that is a reflex, and it's a reflex relation. There's one input and there's one output, and that's why we test it. And we understand, too, what's an important notion here in this chapter is to understand the reflex as a relationship between a stimulus and a response. It's not just a response, it's the relationship. Not just anything will produce that little kick. It's a hammer blow, it's a little blow on the patellar tendon produces that little kick. The doctor doesn't yell at you to get him to kick, or he doesn't give you smelling salts to do a kick. So we understand reflex is a relationship between a stimulus and a response. It's not just the response, it's not just the stimulus, it's the going together of them. So we test these reflexes because they're important for central nervous system function, and that's why your doctor tests it to see if your central nervous system is in fact working properly. So my question, I don't know, I would call this an open loop system, and that is the doctor hitting your knee, and if you get a little kick, that doesn't affect whether the doctor hits your knee again with the hammer. So that's an open system. So I'm not sure that a reflex is a feedback system. At one level, it can be seen as a feedback system, because if you experience pain on in your thumb, then that might produce a response that you withdraw your hand from something, and in that case, that could be seen as a feedback system. I like to talk about these things as terms of open loop and closed loop processes. Certainly, a closed loop process is eating. A closed loop process is the thermostat. A reflex, I think, is more like an open loop process, and that's how we tend to think of these things. And these are from engineering and important to think about. Hopefully, that clarifies that stuff a little bit.